Bush, then impeach Cheney, and away we go. I mean, I do say I think there are grounds for impeachment. And of course, the ultimate parody was Bill Clinton being impeached for the Lewinsky thing, which kind of brought impeachment in disrepute, which was very sad, because impeachment's a sound principle, I think. So I'm not quite as high on the impeachment route as some, including you in Idaho, I'm sorry to say.
Email. Given the overwhelming recent evidence like Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed, do you now believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the Kennedy assassination?
Well, I have said in the past more than once that I tend to believe the Warren Commission, and people then people who don't raise a Herculean gust of laughter and slap their legs and say, what an idiot. And I think actually that the subsequent inquiries, including of the famous magic bullet, do ratify that position. Did Lee Harvey Oswald have any accomplices? A lot of people say now no, but if you were there on the afternoon of November the 22nd, and you had Lee Harvey Oswald's name in your Rolodex, how long before you took that name out of your Rolodex and tore it up and burnt the remains and put them in the trash? I tend to think, and I've always thought, that Lee Harvey Oswald thought that by killing Jack Kennedy, he would take the pressure off Castro. And he saw the attempts to kill Castro as something that provoked him to do it. There are a lot of very peculiar things about Lee Harvey Oswald. It's true. But by and large, I tend to agree that I tend definitely to think he shot him. I think he did. I think that the way that the Warren Commission describes it is correct. So, and I don't particularly agree with Posner.
This emailer heard your discussion of journalism schools earlier and asked you, for an aspiring journalist who doesn't want to follow corporate media guidelines, how does one balance doing good work and supporting oneself? The need to make a living. It's a tough one. I mean, I think that freelance journalism when you're starting up is a matter of scraping around, trying to find a little niche that you can go in and, part-timing it or whatever, or going abroad, finding some way to maintain yourself while getting a little clips file going, or, or trying to do an article. And my advice would be to people starting, don't spend too long on a project. Very often you'll have someone, they get into a project and they spend months, if not years on it, and that's not going to pay the mortgage or the rent. And you want to try and get things, and also be general. You can have an area where you're saying to an editor, I really know about this, it's an area of speciality. But, you should try and be able, I hope I could write about 60s cars or the Constitution, or a whole number of areas. I used to write for House and Garden. I reviewed one of Cher's houses. I reviewed lots of houses. I used to really enjoy doing it because I like architecture. I reviewed movies. I like to write about food. I like to write about everything. I mean, if on Counterpunch, if we want to get a real debate going, 9/11 could move over and get into barbecue. We've had some of our most spirited rows because everyone in the country has a really passionately held view about barbecue. And the Texans all come storming in and say the best barbecue in America is to be had in Lockhart. In fact, we got a piece by Joanne Wipajewski on our website about it. Or the best, is the stuff that's made in the Tidewater area or in North Carolina. Now that is an area that it really interests people. So to get back to journalism, you can be how did we get into barbecue? I can't remember that. I think you being interested in a lot of different things and writing about a lot of different
gardening.
things.
I think you should be interested in everything. I mean, I think radicalism, and listening to the questions, I suddenly thought, oh dear, are we going to get narrowed down to we're only talking about Israel and 9/11, whereas radical progressive journalism covers hundreds of areas, that I believe you can have a cheerful, interested view of life. Jeffrey and I try and feel, we're not like metro lefties. We both live on the west side of the United States, he in Oregon and me in Northern California, that, what you do in The Nation, when I first began writing for The Nation, Victor Navasky was mad at me because I wrote a piece once from Key West, where I was living at the time, about raising the Atocha, which was the buried treasure from the Spanish galleon that sank in the 16th century. And he thought I should just do nothing but press criticism and always be writing, meanwhile the New York Times in another, all that stuff. I mean, it's boring after a while. I think, you know, you want to try and vary the mix in journalism and in what you do. And you, above all, want to have a sense of humor. It's thought sometimes to be an offense against the laws of man and God to make a joke. I like to make jokes. I think a lot of life is funny. And so you can have a radical outlook and still think things are pretty funny. And sometimes if you make a joke, people think, this isn't, you know, they say, okay, if you're in an article and you make a joke, you should have a little sign saying, we're now approaching joke, population 550 words. Now, you're now leaving joke, you know, you signal it. Or you have to write a satire. We've given up on satire because when people write satires now, you know, people believe it. One of the things the net produces is tremendous belief in what people are reading. So if you make a joke, people send us funny satires. We've kind of given up printing them because next thing you know, someone wrote a satire, Ron Jacobs, one of our more valued contributors, well, every contributor is valued, but, you know, a valued contributor, wrote a satire involving I think the arrest, I can't remember the circumstances now, something had happened in Iraq involving an American service person. It was a joke. The next thing you know is, you know, everybody it's gone around the net, everybody's saying it's true, and you then have to issue a retraction, or people say, according to the joke website Counterpunch. We don't want to be that, because what we write is stuff that's true. So
you wrote a column one time. It was about, I think, illegal drug use. And as you began it, you said, you made a big clarification to all law enforcement, everything from here on out is a joke.
Is a joke. You know,
Yeah.
I once read years ago a parody. I addressed law enforcement, I don't know. Anyway, I'm sure I did. I read a parody in the Village Voice years ago. It was a conspiracy, and it was a satire on people like Claire Sterling and Arnaud de Borchgrave and Robert Moss. These were people in the late 70s, in the warm-up to the Reagan era, who were inventing these enormous number of conspiracy theories, the Terror International, the plot to kill the Pope, all of which was an attempt to demonize and present, you know, the forces of the left, the Soviet Union as a power, which instead of being a power, Andrew, my brother, wrote a very prescient book called The Threat in the middle 70s. I think the only accurate work about what the nature of the Soviet Union was, in which he just examined the armed forces, interviewed all the Russians who'd come here, realized that the armed forces were in a state the Soviet Union is in a state of decomposition. I mean, it was worth more than a mile-high pile of CIA reports. He actually got it all right. But these people like Moss and Sterling and Arnaud de Borchgrave were being briefed, actually, among other people, by the President's Secretary of Defense, Gates, who then worked for the CIA, or he was in the National Security Council, in spinning all these insane fantasies. And I wrote a parody of it in the Village Voice. You know, and it was decorated as a parody. We had little black bats, typographically, you know, lying all over the page, which were kind of saying, joke. I woke up in the morning, the voice used to come out, I think, on a Wednesday, to find it being read out over WBAI as a totally serious scenario. So I mean, if Jonathan Swift wrote Gulliver's Travels today, it would be all over the net, you know, that there were peaceful, you know, the Lilliputians and, you know, everything would be regarded as, you know, midget people tying down, etc. People believe everything.
San Francisco, go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Cockburn. Good to talk with you. Thank you for coming on that show. I wanted to bring up your article that you had written. It's called The 9/11 Conspiracy Nuts. And, you know, you're probably going to get a call from one of us, so you're probably ready. But I wouldn't consider myself a conspiracy nut because I actually try to stick with the facts. So what I'm going to do is present you with a couple facts and see how you react to them. The first fact has to do with the president's reaction on 9/11, and that he actually is on record as saying that he watched the plane hit the tower, I should say, and that he then was swept out of the room and brought to the classroom. I was wondering if you were aware of the fact that, and this is just to state what my source is, it's from the White House government news. It's from the White House website, and on the website, President Bush he's responding to a question. This was on, I believe, in December 2001. He went to a town hall meeting, and here's his answer. I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw a plane hit the tower. The TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. I said, it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked out of there. I didn't have much time to think about it, and I was sitting in the classroom, and Andy Card, my chief of staff, who is sitting over here, walked in and said, a second plane has hit the tower. America is under attack. Now, I'm just curious whether you were aware that the president had gone ahead later and admitted that he saw the second plane hit the tower, which to me is significant because that would mean the whole little theatrical performance there of Andrew Card coming out and whispering in his ear, America is under attack. And I'm just curious, does that seem like a newsworthy item to you, or, you know?
It's like a lot of the 9/11. I called you nuts. I apologize to every non-nut in America. I now call you conspiracists. You were always very mad at me for calling you nuts. And you wrote me 1,000 letters, all of them more or less identical, expressing your anger and outrage in various terms, and of course calling me various rude names. Now, that little scenario about Bush, I don't quite see what it all adds up to. Really, I always thought he was slightly to his credit, actually, the president, that, you know, he didn't want to upset these kids in the classroom. This is always presented as either the fact that he's meant to be a moron or, you know, delayed moral reactions or whatever. My fundamental premise about 9/11, and you asked me a little question, I know there are 9,000 little questions that each person who believes in the 9/11 conspiracy, insiders, job stuff, believes in. I just don't. I think the evidence as we marshaled it through Manuel Garcia and Points discredits the theory, but I don't want to get into that because we'd spend the rest of C-SPAN's time and plus 1,000 times more like rattling to and fro over the points of all these various arguments. My fundamental view is that 9/11 people tend to believe in the perfect plan. That now you seem to be implying already there was a perfect bit of theater laid out carefully for purposes I can't quite fathom, in the same way that everything else works absolutely perfectly with clockwork precision. First of all, is it likely that Dick Cheney and George Bush sat down one day and said, we want to organize a pretext for a war on terror, great idea, let's have these people fly into the towers. There's subsets of this, that they were done by remote control. There are subsets that there wasn't a plane that hit the Pentagon, although many people saw the plane. It was a rocket because there's one picture which shows a hole. I can guarantee every conspiracy in the country is now kicking the television screen as I speak. But it seems to me that the idea, first of all, that they would do this mad course. If they were discovered, they'd be stood up against the wall and shot after a rather rapid impeachment, and the Republican Party would cease to exist. The conspiracy, when you add up the number of people involved, is meant to involve, what, 10,000 people, 15,000 people, none of whom have been on their deathbed and said, I have something on my mind. I'd like to say that I was part of the 9/11 conspiracy and I planted a demolition charge on the 85th floor of the World Trade Center. None of that has ever happened. You're meant to presuppose that the military. Now, Griffin, who's the high priest of all this nonsense, says, you know...
David Ray
Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
He's always billed as a theologian, as though that's any particular credential for talking about, you know, 9/11. He says, you know, that between the time the plane disappeared from the FAA radar to the time that it hit the tower, which was in, what, 8:44, I think, 8:11 to 8:44 or 8:06, I can't remember. In that time, everything should have worked, unless there was a plot, by clockwork precision. That suddenly the FAA would have immediately got onto NORAD, NORAD would have got onto the base commander, the guy wouldn't be, you know, in Target trying to buy his wife dog food or new kind of dog food. They would have rushed back, got in the plane, shot up in the air, located the Flight 11, whichever one it was, and shot it down over Union City, New Jersey. I mean, give me a break. Any history of any event of this nature shows, you know, multiple foul-ups. Multiple foul-ups, including the pilot at the end. He said, you want me to shoot down that plane?